there are recent Though there are recent advances in the pathophysiology, still the clinical diagnosis in this becomes very enigmatic. So as we SIG group, we thought we'll explore the whole of this endometriosis from the recent advances in the diagnosis to the pathophysiology, going up to the management. So I really thank our IFS President Dr. Neena Malhotra ma'am, who are really a source of motivation, inspiration for us to connect these webinars, which we have planned to connect it throughout this year with various themes. And I also like to welcome Dr. Neena ma'am and Dr. Shweta Gupta, who is General Secretary of IFS, and Dr. Rajapriya ma'am, who is Chief South Zone Coordinator for IFS, today's guest of honor. And I really like to welcome Dr. Kuldeep Jain sir, who has really agreed to become for chairing the session, and that's Shweta Mittal ma'am. And I really welcome all the uh, distinguished faculties, the chairpersons, the delegates, who can be a lot of contribution for this webinar. With these few words, I'll really like to thank everyone once again. And I think if Neena ma'am has joined, we'll have ma'am to tell few words. Nina ma'am told she'll be in a meeting, but she'll join and tell few words. Everyone knows about Nina ma'am. She's a professor and head of Department of OPGN in AIMS Institute. She's also a director for WHO Collaborative Center for Research and expert member of now. She's recently appointed as an expert member for National ART and Surrogacy Board of Government of India. And she's a chairperson in Imaging Committee in the Foxy. And madam has a lot of credits. She has a fellowship and awards, and she has published more than 172 in various pub index articles. So I think they'll And by the time I'll introduce our one more guest of honor, Dr. Shweta Gupta. She's a Secretary General of IFS. She's a Director IVF Reproductive Medicine Specialist at Max Super Special Hospital, Delhi and Noida. She has did MSc in Reproductive Medicine, Fellowship in ERT and Reproductive Medicine, and completed a training at ERT at certified from British Fertility Society. Special achievements are she has did a fellow representative of RCOG North Zone and is also an internal examiner for MRCOG and past editor of IFS, Delhi Forum IFS. And we are proud to have with us again our South Zone Coordinator, IFS member, Dr. Rajapriya ma'am. She's a Managing Director, Home Fertility Center from Srinivas Priya Hospital, Chennai. Madam was a past Secretary of IFS Tamil Nadu, and she is an ex-committee member of OGC side South India, and she is a member of Sexual Health Committee and Joint Secretary of ATN RCOG, and she is an ISOG Foxy member for course head in Chennai and also an examiner. So I welcome you all, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Chitra.
I'll just call up Neena ma'am to just join. And our Pondicherry chapter secretary, Dr. Jayashree, has also joined. Welcome you, Jayashree.
Dr. Shweta Gupta has joined, Dr. Chitra.
Okay. Shweta Gupta ma'am, welcome you. Please, Neena ma'am is joining or not, ma'am? Shall we go ahead? Can you give say a few words as a guest of honor, ma'am? I think we'll start with
I will just then
yes,
help you in
madam.
the process. Good evening to everyone. It's a lovely initiative by the SIG Endometriosis Group that you have started this series. Endometriosis has been a condition where always we are confused as how early we can diagnose, how early we can intervene and treat, and can we really prevent the sequelae and the recurrence, and how best can we help the patient. So for this, you've got a great team to address the evening. We have Dr. Ramani Devi and Dr. Chitra, and Dr. Ramani Devi has contributed a lot towards endometriosis. So I request Dr. Chitra to take the proceedings further. We have from the center Dr. Kuldeep sir, and who will be giving the expert comments as a chair. So Dr. Chitra, please go ahead and start the evening's webinar, because I think already you were 30 minutes late because of another event.
Yes,
So
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We'll do that thing, sir.
yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your kind, inspiring words. Thank you so much. And we'll proceed for the first session. I like to call upon my screen is shared, madam.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, to chair the first session, I like to call our mentor. I think that Kuldeep sir is the first person. When we started with the IFS chapter in Pondicherry, sir was more than willing, and he was the one person who was over here for the inauguration of this chapter. Thank you so much, sir, for consenting to be the chairperson for this session. Sir is a director of KGF and Laparoscopy Center in Delhi and Faridabad, and is formerly a reader and formerly a professor at Mustafar Medical College at Mustafar, and is committed to serve humanity for more than 35 years. I think sir has contributed a lot to the field of reproductive medicine, and he has more than 35 years of experience in teaching experience. And sir currently has a national and international positions as a board of directors for Indian Fertility Society, editor-in-chief for Fertility Science and Research, chairperson for International Exchange Committee, vice president for International Society of Reproductive Surgery, member scientific committee, World Congress for 2029 in Japan, and organizing chairperson for Fusion 2024. So thank you for consenting to be a chairperson. I welcome you once again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Then I'd like to invite the next chairperson, Dr. Chitra. She is a chapter secretary for IFS South Tamil Nadu past. And now she's a director of Shamla Nursing Home, and she has undergone IVF training under B.N. Chakravarti sir and Dr. P.C. Wong. She is completed undergraduate from Tanjore Government Medical College, and she has given a lot of talk in various national and international conferences. She has been a past president of the Triox and patron of TNFOG, and she is the organizing secretary. I welcome you, ma'am. Thanks for consenting to be the chairperson. Chitra ma'am, welcome you.
Thank you, Chitra.
I like to invite the third chairperson, Dr. Ambika Devi. She's a fertility consultant at Nova IVF Center, and she has did her MRCG in 2019. She has undergone fellowship in reproductive medicine and gynec endoscopy training, and she is one of the recipient of Young Achievers Award by ISA. Welcome you, Ambika Devi.
Good evening, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Chitra, for kind introduction. And without any delay, I think we are already late. So
Yes, sir.
actually, endometriosis is one thing which is always gives a lot of questions rather than answers. And this is true for all aspects of endometriosis. So today, first speaker is Dr. Chitra herself. She is the organizer of this wonderful CME under SIG endometriosis, and she will be speaking on how early you can diagnose endometriosis. Because that is very, very important, and it is important to understand the early detection of endometriosis if it is possible. So let us see what she has to say. Dr. Chitra.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for this kind introduction, sir. Actually, I have last year, I think, under the leadership of Kuldeep Jain sir, Pankaj Talwar sir, we did an endometriosis, a lot of endometriosis activity. I'm also a part of endometriosis committee of Foxy. So over the years, I've seen this is such an enigmatic disease. Many people are suffering. Sometimes the suffering is diagnosed very late. By the time already damage would have occurred. So though we are using transvaginal ultrasound, MRI, or laparoscopy, which is a gold standard, one thing what I've seen recently is the clinical clinical diagnosis which it is a call for an action. So it becomes a spotlight. So, as already everyone knows, endometriosis is a chronic inflammatory condition which is characterized by the presence of ectopic endometrial glands and stroma outside the uterus, which is lead to the estrogen-driven inflammation. And the extent of disease is quite variable. It can be from minimal peritoneal deposits up to it can go even to the infiltration into the POD also. So it has a quite significant impact on these reproductive health, on the mental health, on the psychological health, and it will really affect the quality of life of these patients. We have seen that 40 to 50% of women and adolescents have persistent pelvic pain, which we have seen the diagnosis of endometriosis, and 30 to 40% of women with infertility also suffer from endometriosis. And it's not necessary the severity of symptoms are same as they produce, but the severity of symptoms differs during the presentation. A patient who are having a mild endometriosis can have a severe symptoms. A patient can have an no symptoms with deep infiltrating endometriosis. So it doesn't correlate with the extent of the disease. It has shown that 6 out of 10 cases of endometriosis are quite undiagnosed. So as next we are going to have and talk about, because etiology of endometriosis is not completely understood, we have a next talk by Dr. Ramani Devi, madam, who is an eminent expert. Sorry, ma'am, I forgot to welcome you. Madam is in one of the meetings. She's going to join us shortly, and she is one of the walking encyclopedia in endometriosis, who is going to tell us about what are the various origins of this endometriosis. As I've told you, that symptoms can vary over time, and few patients can be asymptomatic, and one by incidentally it can be incidental finding when you're doing the laparoscopy, especially in patients of infertility. When I have did a laparoscopy for unexplained infertility, I could see the endometriotic spots over here and there. So they are usually asymptomatic, but presence of that might not be contributing to the infertility. So at current, what we do is we rely on laparoscopy for definitive diagnosis before starting them any treatment. So there is a prolonged delay between the onset of symptoms, the diagnosis, and on the therapy. One of the literature has shown that there's a delay of 4 to 11 years from the onset of symptoms to the diagnosis. This is too much. By the time we diagnose and start the actual treatment of endometriosis, already I told them they would have gone into a very late stages where it can become a deep infiltrating. So why do you have a challenges in diagnosis? One, various conditions mimic the features of endometriosis, and there's a lack of any obvious lesions which do not eliminate the possibility of this endometriosis. So what is new in this? As I've already told you, visualization by laparoscopy and confirmation by histology is a gold standard, but it has its own limitations as supported by all this SCOG, ISHRAE, RCOG. So many clinicians have now rely on the clinical diagnosis for initiating the therapy. So what is this diagnosis? Recent guidelines have told that a non-surgical, that is a clinical-based diagnosis based only on the symptoms and findings, that is on examination or imaging, can be used instead of going for this invasive procedures. And we usually don't have any blood biomarker for reliable diagnosis of this endometriosis, though we are considering laparoscopy is the gold standard. Even though we do the surgery, it is not curative. It has its own limitations, at its own risk. So sometimes waiting for the surgical diagnosis can lead to a long delay between the onset of symptoms and the adequate treatment. So this delay can be due to the symptoms variability, suboptimal healthcare provider, or it can be patient awareness is very less, or sometimes the patients can have a stigma in discussing the symptoms, or there can be have a societal normalization of pain. Most of the patient whom I've seen, they might having severe dyspnea. They thought it's a normal, okay, it will go be there for 2 days, it might go. So they will suffer this for at least 6 to 1 year. By the time they come, it would have been already spread. And more important, it becomes diagnosis of this endometriosis and adolescence becomes very difficult as pelvic pain is more common in this patient. So when you take the natural history of disease, one study which has shown that when they did the endometriosis laparoscopy and followed up these patients after 6 to 12 months, they found that endometriosis progression in 30 to 45% of the patient, it remained unchanged in 30 to 40%, and also it regressed in 20 to 25% of these patients. So what are the factors? What are the factors which lead you to the regression or progression? If you ask any patients, high suspicion of endometriosis, you ask the history of the patient, finding out any of the first degree relative are having with endometriosis. What is a menarche? Whether they're saying early menarche or having a menorrhagia or they're having very short cycles or history of any Mundelein anomalies or diagnosed to have a Mundelein anomaly, nulliparous, they are low birth weight or low BMI. These are the factors which are risk factors known to have origin of this endometriosis. Then that is regarding risk factors. When coming to the clinical symptoms, as I've already mentioned again and again, symptoms can vary and change over time, and sometimes it can be an incidental finding. So 90% of these might be symptomatic, and where the patient can come with a secondary dysmenorrhea, that is on the first day of the onset of menses. And these symptoms also can depends on the perception, the intensity of the pain, the location of the pain, the duration, and the recurrence. They vary from individual to individual. When you ask a patient about the pelvic pain, I think this is one of the most common symptoms, but the presence of that symptom is not alone sufficient to diagnose endometriosis. Most of this pain is persistent or progressive, which might think, yes, it can be associated with the progression of this endometriosis. And later, the patient, what can be a menstrual pain, patient can, later it can become a non-menstrual pelvic pain also. And when they respond, because endometriosis inflammatory conditions, when they respond to NSAIDs, it can be one more indicator tell she might be suffering from endometriosis. We have to look into the other symptoms like dyschezia, where the patient can have painful bowel movements, bloody stools, hematochezia, dysuria, or hematuria. So when you tell them menstrual pains, 4 important things: the duration of menses, which is longer, shorter menstrual cycle, irregular cycles, menorrhagia, increased menstrual volume, and postcoital bleeding. And the first 3 symptoms are very important, might be having a high suspicion of this endometriosis. We already know the triad of endometriosis is infertility, deep dyspareunia, severe dysmenorrhea. Any patient with infertility having these 2 symptoms come to us in the OPD, you need to have a high suspicion of this endometriosis. Along with that, you can have on examination, you can see the patient can be having endometrioma or it can be having an adenomyosis. Not necessarily patient can come with only menstrual or non-specific symptoms. They can come with even non-specific symptoms like diaphragmatic or thoracic implants of endometriosis, which can lead to cyclical chest pain, shoulder pain, hemoptysis, or pneumothorax. And when you ask a patient any prior laparoscopic surgery or family history also can give a high suspicion. Patient having a low backache, persistent abdomen pain, bloating sensation, sometimes which might affect the quality of like fatigue, depression, anxiety. All these symptoms can also suggest us high index of suspicion. So according to the ISHRAE guidelines, which has told that the GDG recommends that clinicians should consider diagnosis of endometriosis in individuals presenting with the following cyclical and non-cyclical signs and symptoms like dysmenorrhea, dyspareunia, dysuria, dyschezia, painful rectal bleeding, or hematuria. Whenever non-specific like shoulder tip pain, catamenial pneumothorax, cyclical cough, chest pain, cyclical scar swelling or pain, fatigue, or infertility. You should consider both specific and non-specific symptoms in diagnosis of this endometriosis. I just went through a few of the studies to know that how these symptoms are really helpful in diagnosing the endometriosis. One study done in way back in 2016 and 17. Recently, I did not get any articles. Way back in 2016 and 17, we found that in one study, they've shown that any history of pelvic surgery had an odds ratio of 14.55, followed by the pelvic pain. And one study by Fildero in 2007, where the online self-reporting was done, they found that non-menstrual pelvic pain had an odds ratio of 4.1, followed by infertility, which shows that these are one of the risk factors for endometriosis. And Saha in 2017, when they did a cross-sectional survey, they found that the specificity, that is the most important term, the specificity of chronic pelvic pain, dyspareunia was more than compared to the other symptoms. And one retrospective cohort study also showed that one of these things, premenstrual spotting for more than 2 days has a high specificity of 19% and dyspareunia of 83%. So these are the typical symptoms which when you ask in a OPD, this can give a high suspicion that patient can be having an endometriosis. So when you do the abdominal examination, if at all patient is having an endometrioma, you can find it's a mass per abdomen, or if the uterus is bulky or just palpable, they can have high suspicion of adenomyosis can also be there. On per vagina examination, the typical features: retroverted fixed uterus, nodulity in the posterior vaginal fornix, tender posterior lateral vaginal fornices, or presence of any adnexal mass can show that there is a high suspicion the patient can be having an endometriosis. Rectovaginal, usually we do it for only for adolescents because it is a very painful, and sometimes the patient can have a religious constraint and may not be agreeing. But doing a rectovaginal examination help us to identify the infiltration or mass evolving into the rectosigmoid region, which will highly diagnosis of rectovaginal endometriosis. The ISHRAE guidelines in 2022 have shown that clinical examination, including vaginal examination, where appropriate, should be considered to identify deep nodules or endometriomas in patients with suspected endometriosis, although the diagnostic accuracy is low in these patients. So it's very easy when you do pervaginal examination in adults, but when you come to adolescent endometriosis, it becomes very difficult to diagnose endometriosis because they present with symptoms, that is especially the pelvic pain, which will be varied in presentations and can be coming with a various patterns compared to that of these adults. They can also present with heavy menstrual bleeding, premenstrual spotting, or the bowel symptoms. You should also look into the other systemic symptoms like nausea, diarrhea, dizziness, headache, which is more prominent in during the menses. One of the study have shown that if at all you look into their absenteeism from the school or from family history, that also will give an idea that this patient is really suffering severe dysmenorrhea or pelvic pain, which might be in high suspicion for this endometriosis. So it is not only the presentation, even if there is a delay in the diagnosis can occur because there is insufficient knowledge of this among the treating physicians towards this adolescents. So guidelines have told that in adolescents, clinicians should take a careful history to identify the possible risk factors for endometriosis, such as positive family history, obstetric genital malformations, early menarche, or short menstrual cycles. But in clinician may also consider in young women presenting with cyclical abstinence from the school or with the use of OCPs for the treatment of dysmenorrhea can also have high suspicion this patient can be suffering from endometriosis. So in adolescents, clinicians should take a careful history, consider the following: chronic or acyclical pelvic pain, particularly combined with nausea, dysmenorrhea, dysphagia, dysuria, dyspareunia, and cyclical pelvic pain. These two typical symptoms should be considered in adolescents to tell, yes, she might be high suspicion, she might be having endometriosis. And the GDG recommends that before performing any vaginal examination or rectal examination, the acceptable should be discussed with the adolescent under caregiver, taking into consideration the patient's age and the cultural background. So one of this article which has saying clinical diagnosis and early medical management for endometriosis, they have summarized that clinical diagnosis should focus on symptom recognition, which can be presumed to be endometriosis without any laparoscopic confirmation. So you don't have to have a laparoscopy for confirmation. Give a more importance to the clinical diagnosis, and transvaginal ultrasound can be appropriate for diagnosing or confirming your pelvic endometriosis. For early empirical treatment, management of women with clinical presentation suggest of endometriosis should be individualized and consider presentation and therapeutic need. So you don't have to go for an hi-fi laparoscopy to consider. Any patients have high suspicion, start a hormone therapy. So this is the clinical diagnosis on vaginal examination. There is a role of questionnaire. If you put a role of questionnaire, one study showed, does the use of symptom diaries or a questionnaire compared to traditional history taking a lead to improve early diagnosis of endometriosis? As we know, in Western countries, to meet a practitioner, it takes a lot of time. So everyone knows the pain is a cardinal symptom of this endometriosis, and the perception, intensity, location, duration also varies. And one of the suitable options is when there's a delay in getting the appointment, we can tell the patients or adolescents to maintain a diary, and through that diary will come to the severity of symptoms and whether it is correlating with the disease, doesn't correlate with disease. They've shown that in the questionnaire include age at menarche, what is the cyclical length, whether dysmenorrhea is there or not, whether it is a primary or secondary dysmenorrhea, what is the type of the pelvic pain, whether there is a menstrual dysphagia, dysuria, or hematuria. So depending on this, the one study has did the enzyme scoring, which they told that if it is a dyspareunia, it goes to uterosacral ligament parameter, where the disease is in compartment B. If the patient is telling dysphagia, it is a rectum and sigmoid colon, where disease is in compartment C. And if it is in patient is having a dysuria with hematuria, it is involvement of the bladder, where disease is in compartment B. So, in regarding the questionnaire, if you maintain the dairy and through dairy, we can do the early diagnosis. According to district guidelines, although currently no evidence exists that a symptom dairy questionnaire or app reduces the diagnosis or leads to early diagnosis, but the GDRA considers the potential benefit in coming to the traditional history taking process compared to traditional history process, and it aids in objectifying pain and empowering women of their symptoms. So what are the strength and limitation of this clinical diagnosis? One, if you take the clinical history, it is a non-invasive, feasible, low cost, and it can predict the disease location, may facilitate the therapeutic alliance, also may help in the guiding the treatment choice for depending on the symptoms. But it has its own limitations because some of the symptoms of endometriosis has a various differential diagnosis, and it cannot be predictive of the disease extent. And the sensitivity is around 76 to 98%. Specificity varies very less, 20 to 58%. Physical examination, yes, it is accessible, high specificity. It is also an opportunity to detect a deep infiltrating endometriosis by visualization or palpation. But it has low sensitivity, outcomes are operator dependent, diagnosis accuracy varies by disease location, and examination may be considered very invasive and painful. Though it has a high specificity, the sensitivity extends from 18 to 88%. So limitations are accuracy predicting diagnosis because of inter-observed variation will be there, and symptoms have any symptoms have a multifactorial etiology, and even the psychological factors also can influence the severity of these symptoms. So in the present era, we are diagnosing endometriosis more by transvaginal MRI and confirmation by laparoscopy. So the guidelines tell that in women who suspect endometriosis, further diagnostic tests, including imaging, should be considered if the clinical examination is normal. So first go for clinical examination. If that is normal, but you have a symptoms telling that it can be a high suspicion, then go for the imaging. So before you go for imaging, you need to have a differential diagnosis of each and every symptom. If a patient is having dysmenorrhea, think whether it is primary dysmenorrhea, it because of adenomyosis or because of uterine fibroid, cervical stenosis, or any obstetric lesions of this genital tract. So that will give an idea when you tell the history of the patient, okay, this can be one of the differential diagnosis, because as I already told you, pelvic pain is one of the most common symptoms. Deep dyspareunia, yes, you think of any pelvic masses, myofascial pain, cervicitis, and painful bladder syndrome. When a patient gives up chronic pelvic pain in the pelvis for more than 6 months, always you need to think of irritable bowel syndrome, painful bowel syndrome, any myofascial pain, PID, pelvic adhesions, or neuropathies, pelvic venous disorders. So when you come into the diagnosis of endometriosis, you need to evaluate or rule of this diagnosis to come to a conclusion, yes, this patient can be having an endometriosis. So this chart, the 4 important things, the classical symptoms, the signs, non-specific symptoms, and risk factors. These 4 things should be considered anytime patient visits OPD, which would really help you in telling a high index of suspicion based only on the clinical symptoms before going to the imaging. So symptoms, again, I am re-emphasizing: dysmenorrhea, dyspareunia, chronic pelvic pain, infertility, dysuria, hematuria, dysphagia, chest pain, shoulder pain, hemoptysis, non-specific symptoms like abdominal uterine bleeding, low backache, abdominal pain, and fatigue because of the effect of this endometriosis, which will affect the quality of life. And signs, 4 cardinal signs are retroverted fixed uterus, nodulity in the pouch of Douglas, tender posterior and lateral vaginal furnaces, adnexal mass. And I already told you the risk factors. If any of the patients attenders, like first degree relative with endometriosis, if the patient is having early menarche, heavy flows, having any diagnosed Muller anomaly, nulliparous, had a low birth weight or low BMI, all these factors in the OPD while history taking can give a high suspicion that patient can be having endometriosis. When you have high suspicion, you do an ultrasound, you find other pelvic pathology, yes, treat accordingly. If you find any endometrioma, yes, you go for hormonal therapy. If you don't find anything, then you subject the patient for higher imaging like MRI. Okay, this is one more algorithm. Clinical history, your suspicion is there, you do the clinical examination. If you find a palpable deep endometriosis, directly ask the patient for the MRI or 3D ultrasound. If there was no visible any lesions, yes, you can consider on clinical examination, go for transvaginal. If you find any visible lesions, yes, you can consider, yes, it's a diagnostic, and you can go for MRI. If you do not find anything, again, you have to go and do the diagnostic. At the end, even MRI is also not showing any diagnostic pathology or any features of endometriosis, then you go for this invasive technique, that is laparoscopy. So first evaluate the presence of symptoms, review the patient history, perform the physical examination, then perform the imaging. This is my thank you. This is my last conclusion slide, where you have to give importance to the symptoms, then to the patient history, then for the physical examination, then you go for this imaging. So laparoscopy is no longer the diagnostic gold standard, especially prescribed in patients who are having negative imaging results or who is not responding to any medical management based on these symptoms. So in conclusion, I like to tell that enhanced use of clinical diagnostic techniques may reduce the delay in time to diagnosis and hence bring more rapid relief to affected patients, limit their disease progression, and prevent sequelae. Thank you. I thank this IFS SIG opportunity for giving me to talk on this as a starting speaker of this IFS webinar on endometriosis. We are named this as Endo Talks, where we like to explore this endometriosis throughout various themes throughout the year. Thank you, the conveners and the IFS President, Dr. Neena ma'am and Shweta Gupta ma'am. Thank you. And my mentor, Dr. Rosa ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Chitra, for a wonderful talk. Actually, it was very well thought topic, as well as you delivered a deep insight in which we are not doing actually. That is the problem,
Yes.
and that's why it gets delayed. Because symptom, as far as the dysmenorrhea is concerned, it is taken as a normal symptom of menstrual cycle. And most of the endometriosis actually starting in the adolescent phase only. So problem
Yes, sir.
is there are limitation of all imaging modalities in adolescent
Yes,
endometriosis.
sir.
And until unless you are having a high index of suspicion of endometriosis, you will not be able to diagnose. So that
True,
area
sir.
you have touched beautifully, and that is the only thing which I will also like to say, that until unless a clinician who is having a high index of suspicion of endometriosis cannot diagnose the endometriosis early. So the message is, as a clinician, as a gynecologist, one should have a high index of suspicion and start from the symptoms and examination. You will be
Yes.
able to diagnose more people. We conducted, during my chairmanship, we conducted a school survey all over India.
Oh, okay, sir.
That was very informative survey, and
Ah,
we found that apart from dysmenorrhea, which was present in almost 70-80% of the girls,
yeah.
but the absenteeism from school was one of the very good criteria for suspicion of diagnosis of endometriosis, because it was seen that those girls who were absenting the school
That's was.
because of dysmenorrhea, they
Hmm.
were actually the candidate for the early diagnosis.
Endometriosis. Yeah, sir.
So,
The
and
most
that was
majority studies also show
yes,
the same thing. Yeah.
yes, yeah. So absenteeism of in the school it should be taken as one of the criteria actually for
True, sir.
suspicion of endometriosis. That was the suggestion. And second suggestion was, we found out that uh, endometriosis is more common in southern part of India when we compare
Yes, sir.
from
Yeah,
north.
yeah, correct.
Yeah. And but the prescription rate
Any
was
reason for that, sir? Any reason you did
high
find out
in
why it is?
northern part. Yeah. There was no reason as such. There was no we could not find, because it was just a school survey. So we could not find the reason. But these were some of the findings which were very, very different from the present literature. So I think you have really wonderfully highlighted all these things. And that is one suggestion, that we should have regular school surveys to find out
Okay,
more
sir.
and more
Yes.
people who are suffering, because they usually they don't go to the right person. they will be going to general physician, and then they will be going to pediatrician, then they will be going to
Yeah,
then they will be coming to gynecologist.
true,
So
sir. True.
so I think that area needs to be looked into when the question of endometriosis is coming, especially in endometriosis in adolescent group. So thank you and congratulations for the wonderful talk.
Thank you so much,
Welcome,
sir.
Yeah. Any other comment from any other
sir.
chairpersons?
Dr.
Yeah.
Ramani ma'am, welcome, ma'am. Ramani ma'am.
Thank you, Chitra. It was nice listening to you on a clinical diagnosis, and I think we need to extend our research in this particular area, because adolescent endometriosis, it has become very common, and we quite often, as Dr. Kuldeep has rightly pointed out, I don't know for what reason we have a higher incidence of endometriosis in the south. But one thing is, we don't see much of this deep infiltrative endometriosis when compared to eastern side. We see more of endometriomas. And of course, 1/3 of the endometriomas, they have deep infiltrative lesions. So probably my thing is, we need to promote the research in that. And I have been doing microRNAs in as a non-invasive diagnosis for these young girls. We have selected few microRNAs, which Dr. Phillips Descamps has presented in many of the forums using salivary microRNA.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the
You
same
correct.
microRNAs, we try to do it from the saliva of our patients who are probably suffering from endometriosis or proven cases, but probably because of the temperature, it was not stable in our environment. So we
Yeah,
tried the
problem.
same.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
the
we tried
sensitivity, the sensitivity of the salivary mRNA is that's why not very good
So
in
instead, what
studies.
I
Yeah.
have done is, we have selected from the serums, sir, the same microRNAs. We
Mm.
have compared for nearly, I have compared for proven cases of endometriosis for more than 90 patients, and proven non-endometriosis through laparoscopy. We have confirmed, and then we found out that the sensitivity and specificity of these microRNAs were very high, with a good AUC curve. It was beyond 90%
Okay.
sensitivity and specificity. Plus, based upon this, I extended my research on young girls, like coming from school with a history of progressive dysmenorrhea and school absenteeism. These were the only two criteria we took, and we did the microRNA for these patients, and we found that it was ultimately we narrowed down to 3 microRNAs, which were very significant, and we found that it was very highly sensitive and specific. So probably
Okay.
now I am doing it for routine,
Yeah,
because routinely for all my young girls coming with progressive dysmenorrhea and school absenteeism, this testing, and then we put the patient on progesterone, or maybe Dynegist is the first line of drug I choose. Even in that group, I have completed for more than 300 patients, and some of my patients, they wanted, even though they were young, adolescent girls, unmarried, they did not want to take the drug without a confirmative diagnosis. So for few patients, I did a laparoscopy, and we were surprised to find very early endometriotic lesions or Allen-Masters window. Last week, I had a patient with just a simple unexplained infertility. We saw few Allen-Master windows. And then when I did the microRNA, it was highly positive. So I think in future, it is definitely this non-invasive biomarkers are going to play a major role in the early diagnosis of endometriosis.
Yes.
yeah, true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kuldeep sir. I think thank you, madam. You really gave a good feedback. And Kuldeep sir, I was really happy that school survey. I will connect with you, sir. Since you're
Yeah,
told
it
South
was in his
more.
period, we did a school survey for more than,
Yeah,
I
that,
remember 1,500 patients,
yes,
girls.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And I did it in one of the colleges, nearly 700 patients students at a time.
Yes,
I
yes.
called all of them. I just gave an intro about endometriosis. I made them bring the smartphone. I asked them to fill the Google form. Simple
Yeah.
thing. I covered, I
And
got
that was actually the very informative survey.
yes, yes.
Unfortunately, we could not continue that survey, but we should continue
Yes.
doing these surveys so we get more information, and we can pick these young girls early in the course of disease.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Ambika, anything from your side, Ambika? Chitra ma'am?
No, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. It was very useful. And so, a normal ultrasound does not exclude endometriosis.
That was
And
excellent,
any
Chitra.
severe dysmenorrhea in adolescents, we have to evaluate and then we have to offer the empirical treatment. So, it was very useful, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay. I really thank all the chairpersons. Kuldeep sir, thank you so much. In your busy thing also, you accept to chair the session because I wanted some expert to be over there to think. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'll connect with you, sir. I'll connect
Yeah,
with you.
sure.
Chitra, shall we move on to the
Yeah, yes,
One
ma'am.
second.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just going for this thing now.
Second session will be chaired by
Yeah.
Dr. Sweta Mittal, Dr. Shalini Khanna, and Dr. Jayashree. Sweta
And-
Mittal, madam, is here. Dr.
Yeah, I
Good evening.
Madam,
Hello,
Shweta,
madam.
who doesn't know Shweta, madam? Like 2 years I had a
Shalini
stall
Khanna
in
is
the
also
Shweta
here.
madam.
Chitra,
Yes,
Chitra,
Chitra, please.
shall I go ahead?
Ma'am, let me introduce Shweta, ma'am. Chitra, ma'am, please introduce Shweta, ma'am.
Yes, that's what.
Make it full screen.
Chitra has to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. She has been the General Secretary IFS. Okay.
And now the first vice president.
Yeah,
With the whole
correct.
team,
Yeah.
and now the director of the Center of IVF at Gangaram.
Oh.
Yeah, okay,
I
ma'am.
think this
Yeah,
much of introduction is good enough. We are eager
yeah.
to
No.
the
Madam,
lecture.
thank you for accept to be the chair of the session. Thank you so much, ma'am.
I only remember, or Sweta, I only
Yeah.
remember or like to say that you were the first national DNP student of India. That's all that
Yeah.
I like to always say because I was with you when I was at PCS place.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Shalini,
Welcome,
Dr.
Dr.
Shalini is held up with some meeting, and Dr. Jayashree she'll join late. Now, I
We have
think.
Dr. Jayashree Mani.
Yeah,
I've joined
yes,
Dr.
ma'am.
Chitra.
Good
I've
evening, ma'am.
joined.
I've joined.
Oh,
ma'am.
Shalini has joined. Okay.
Yeah.
I have also joined Dr. Chitra.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes.
Jayashree has joined. Fine.
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you.
So welcome Dr. Shalini Chawla Khanna. She's been the web editor, Indian Fertility Society for the year 26-28, joint web editor, Indian Fertility Society 24-26.
That's okay, Dr. Chitra. I think we can
Okay.
go ahead with
Yeah.
the talk. Introduce the speaker
We have
and
Jayashree.
We
We have Jayashree also with us from Pondicherry.
Yeah.
She's the secretary of the Pondicherry Society of IFS. Over to you, Dr. Ramani, to start your lecture.
No, we'll introduce Ramani, Madam. Shweta, Madam, will
Dr.
introduce
Ramani is
Ramani.
well known for her. Okay.
So
Shweta,
it's a
ma'am.
pleasure to introduce Professor Dr. T. Ramani Devi. She has been the president of, I think, Tamil Nadu, right? Federation
Yes,
of
ma'am.
Gynae in the year 2024. She's also the national vice president of FOXY, ICOG governing council member in the past, managing director of Ramakrishna Medical Center, LLP, and Janani Fertility Center.
Madam, that
If
is
we
okay,
move on the
madam.
right side,
Mm.
multiple awards and accolades, and we can see the keen interest she holds in endometriosis. I was hearing her, so we are looking forward. She's going to deep dive into the origin of endometriosis, and let's see that what meaningful informations we can get from her brilliant lecture. So, ma'am, the
Yeah.
podium is all yours, and everybody is eagerly waiting to hear your lecture.
Thank you, Dr. Sweta, for your kind introduction.
Ma'am, you can share the slides, ma'am.
Yeah, I am just sharing. Can you see?
Not, yeah, ma'am.
Yes.
Yeah, I will make it full screen. Just a moment. Give me.
Madam is one walking encyclopedia in endometriosis. I worked with her on endometriosis community, so I know how much I've learned from her.
I know, we could just see.
Thank you.
Yeah.
See, this diving or delve deep into the root cause of endometriosis. See, there was a story, mythological story between Lord Brahma and Vishnu. So they had a small fight. Who is the bigger one? So they will go and reach Shiva and ask who is the bigger person between the two. Lord Shiva will tell Brahma, you go up and find my head. And he will ask Vishnu to go down and find his root, okay, leg. And finally, they will be traveling for a long time, many yugas. And there was one, this Tarambu, I don't know the English terminology, it fell down from the Lord Shiva's head. So on the way, Brahma meets that. So he will tell that flower, you go and tell Vishnu that I have reached the head of Lord Shiva. And ultimately, Lord Vishnu, Shiva will find out that what he has said was wrong, and nobody can find the top or the bottom of Lord Shiva. That is the actual situation what we come across in endometriosis. Okay. So I bring you greetings from Trichy. This is our beautiful river Kaveri, which is actually dry because of the summer and the Rockford behind. And then this is the 1,000 pillar, this courtyard that is found in the Srirangam temple, which is UNESCO accredited. And here on the other side, you see a beautiful picture that is seen in the one of the churches in Italy. That is actually a 17th century painting where you can see two young girls. See you in the hip. It is a hip chain that is made up of thorns and acorns and apples. Apples are symbol of fertility. Acorns are time it takes for a long time to grow. And then the hip chain depicts the pain or the crampiness the girl gets because of endometriosis. So this disease, if you look into I'll tell you, just go about the history. It is endometriosis is a riddle wrapped in a mystery, in an enigma. So my content will be introduction. What is the root cause? Why understanding is important? What is the role of genetics and epigenetics, and conclusion? So if you look into the history of endometriosis in Ebers Papyrus, that is in Egypt, it is 1500 BC, it was mentioned as a painful disorder of menstruation, and peritoneal endometriosis was brought into thing by Daniel Sharon in the year 1690, and Knapp et al. In 17th and 18th century. In England, they found out that autopsy studies, they saw that evidence of the endometriosis, and it was Karl von Rokitz-Tonsky in 1860. He had brought some idea about the endometriosis. It was Bress et al. In 1894. He spoke about the chocolate cyst. Cullen et al. In 1896, the glandular inclusion. Runch in 1903, he described the endometriomas. It was Mayer in 1903. Scar and intestinal endometriosis were brought. Endometriosis is one of the most enigmatic diseases in gynecology. Despite more than a century of research, its root cause continues to challenge the clinicians and the scientists worldwide. And everybody knows about the definition. It is the presence of normal endometrial tissue that is abnormally implanted in locations other than the uterine cavity. And in adolescence, you get the more of stroma than in the glands. The implants, they grow, invade the tissue in the vicinity, causing inflammatory reaction. Originally, we thought endometriosis was a disease which was hormone-dependent disease, but we now come to understand it is a disease of inflammatory condition. Then the prevalence is very highly prevalent. Younger the age, you get the onset of endometriosis, the patient gets a very severe disease. 25 to 40% of the infertile women, they have endometriosis. 75% of the women with chronic pelvic pain are found to have endometriosis. 40 to 60% of young girls with progressive dysmenorrhea. We should always think about dysmenorrhea. As per the recent estimate, it is about 246 million women suffer from endometriosis globally, and India alone 50 million women they suffer. It is according to the Endo Society of India data. But I think it is still only a tip of an iceberg. Many of our sisters, they do suffer from endometriosis unknowingly. So these are the varying types of endometriosis. All of us are very familiar. Superficial, ovarian endometrioma, deep endometriosis, and adenomyosis. ASRM says endometriosis should be viewed as a chronic inflammatory disease that requires a lifelong management plan with the goal of maximizing the use of medical treatment and avoiding repeated surgical measures. The treatment goals are: we need to alleviate the pain, promote fertility, reduce recurrence, and improve the quality of life ultimately. Looking into the epidemiology, it affects 10 to 15% of the women of reproductive age group, and there is a strong family history, about 6.9-fold higher incidence of endometriosis seen in the family members, mothers, sisters, and the siblings, and often it is diagnosed in the 3rd to 4th decade of life. Those symptoms starts occurring much earlier. I think in this era, we are seeing early endometriosis, adolescent girls with endometriosis, even at early age of say around 15, and it's highly common, and even adenomyosis we see at a very early age. There is increased risk associated with early menarche, shorter menstrual cycles, and prolonged exposure to estrogen. These are the probable causes. So 1 in 10 women of reproductive age group, they suffer from endometriosis, and this prevalence I have already mentioned. In India, there are more than 50 million women who suffer from endometriosis, and 5 to 10% of these women are girls less than 18 years. To say what is the diagnosis of endometriosis based upon the clinical symptoms, I am very fond of the 7 Ds, that is dysmenorrhea, dyspareunia, dysuria, dysphagia, dysfunctional uterine bleeding, diffuse abdominal pain, difficulty in conception, ultimately leading to depression and fatigability. I am happy to say the same wordings of 7 Ds have been mentioned in our FOXI recent recommendation. So this picture shows how to go about the clinical presentation, same clinical presentation what I have mentioned, and then finally how we are going to manage is based upon the pharmacology, physiotherapy, psychological things, surgery, and then this is pain education, and support group network is very important, and lifestyle modification. So this is to give you an overall idea how it should be approached. Now let us see what is the diagnostic delay. See, generally when we discuss about the endometriosis, we say the diagnostic delay is beyond 5 years or even up to 9 years, and the patients go from one doctor to other, and probably they would have seen 6 or 7 doctors, starting from a general physician, family physician, pediatrician, and a gynecologist, and even a psychologist, a psychiatrist. So now this data shows what will be the diagnostic delay depending upon the phenotype. If it is going to be an ovarian endometrioma, it might take 4 years. Abdominal wall endometriomas or scar endometriosis, maybe we can pick it up very early, less than 2 years. Adenomyosis, 9 years. Deep endometriosis may take even 10 years. And again, one study says it can take even 7 years. So again, based upon the symptoms, see how the diagnostic delay can happen. If the patient has got a chronic pelvic pain, maybe they can take 5 years, dyspareunia 5 years, mixturation problem 4 to 5 years, and progressive dysmenorrhea, it may be 12 years, and bleeding problem 9 years, that is DUB, and infertility, maybe we can pick it up very early, and atypical symptoms are very common, and sometimes the disease may be asymptomatic. So defecation problems can also happen, and this can even have a delay of 5 years. So when you look into the natural history of endometriosis, there is increased oxidative stress, abnormal microbiome. There is, if you take into consideration the specific cellular level, there is increased aromatase activity, there is progesterone resistant, cancer-driven mutations are very common in endometriosis, similar to endometrioid malignancy. There can be epigenetic and genetic changes. There can be clonal expansion, and angioneurogenesis can happen in the peritoneal fluid. There can be increased VEGF, and then it can cause immune reaction, that is what is commonly called as repeated tissue injury and repair. And ultimately, this growth will lead to this multiplication of cells will undergo fibrosis. Initially, they will develop multiple glandular tissue and fibrotic thing. And finally, it goes into a phase of self-limiting nature. It will land up with the severe fibrosis and adhesions. Why you have to think about the pathogenesis, why it is so important? It explains the heterogeneous clinical presentation of endometriosis, and it helps to identify the risk factors, early disease mechanism, and recurrence, forms the basis for targeted and personalized therapy. That is very important, and it improves the early diagnosis and prevention strategies. It guides future research and therapeutic innovation. So these are the theories on pathogenesis of endometriosis. I have already mentioned about genetic theory, epigenetic changes. It can be because of the steroid hormones, where there is hyperestrogenism and progesterone resistant, pro-inflammation because of all the peritoneal inflammatory markers are high. There is immune dysregulation, which is the basic cause for promoting the inflammation. There is promotion of oxidative stress due to so many reasons, environment like endocrine disruptors, then again epigenetic changes, and retrograde menstruation, metaplastic transformation are the commonly thought about mechanisms, including lymphogenous and hematogenous spread. But we know that endometrial stem cell therapy is coming into vogue, and embryonic and fetal origin are again going to form the basis of certain types of endometriosis. So now looking into the epidemiological changes in the molecular alteration, this side you can see the epidemiological factors, reduced parity, age at menarche if it is too early, menstrual cycles are short. If the duration of flow increases, then these are the group of people who are likely to get higher incidence because of retrograde spread. And other constitutional factors are family history, reduced BMI, freckles, nevi, and personal habits. Alcohol diet is inconsistent, and smoking has got no effect. But one positive thing is regular exercise reduces the incidence of endometriosis. And looking into the molecular and cellular alteration, there is increased expression of estrogen receptor beta. There is increased aromatase expression. There is perturbations in progesterone signaling mediators like FOXA10 and FOXA1. Nuclear factor kappa B, and then 17 beta steroid hydrogenase 2 deficiency is there. So I will explain subsequently how they all have influenced. Then there is invasiveness, increased invasiveness and vascularization. There is upregulated MMP. There is increased peritoneal VEGF, overactive AKT, that is the reason for pain, recruitment of type 2 expressing macrophages which can act aberrantly and promote the pro-inflammation and inflammatory response. There is higher production of chemokine, rantas, interleukin-1, 8, and recruitment of alternatively activated macrophages and increased peritoneal interleukin-6, tumor necrosis alpha, and so on. And there is accumulation of iron because of the hemocyanin pigments, which gets degradation, and then it can release ROS. So the tissue injury and mechanism, that is, it can cause. One is local protection. Each bit of this endometriotic tissue acts as an apocrine gland, which is capable of producing its own aromatase. So the endogenous conversion of estrogen is very high. And from the macrophage activation, there can be promotion of all these inflammatory substances that will lead to proliferation, survival, and infiltrative growth of ectopic endometrium. Then I said there is 17 beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase deficiency. This is very important because this is an enzyme which converts 17 beta estradiol to estrone. So when this enzyme is deficient, there is failure of conversion of estradiol to estrone. So there will be piling up. Always any estrogen piling up will increase the level of prostaglandin and it becomes pro-inflammatory. Also, it can lead to progesterone resistance. Then coming to the retrograde menstruation theory of Sampson's pill theory also says that here it gets the transtubal spill of the endometriotic tissue into the peritoneal cavity. When it gets stuck into the peritoneal cavity, because of the increased MMPA, there is addition. And again, we know that the VEGF is very high, and this will start producing all this cells will metabolize and they will start growing, and the macrophages that are present in the peritoneal cavity, instead of imbibing these cells which are found in the peritoneal cavity, they act aberrantly. They start producing all pro-inflammatory factors. There is increased BCL2 gene expression that will fail to promote apoptosis, and anti-apoptotic action is there. So there is increased VEGF and NGF. That is the reason for neuroangiogenesis, which will, when these cells, when they get stuck to the peritoneum under the influence of VEGF and neural growth factors, they start producing more and more of vessels. And again, the neural growth factors are very high, and they have found out that the sensory C nerve fibers in the endometrium of endometriotic patients as well as in the endometriotic tissue is very high. That is why there is severe pain. So this is again another retrograde menstruation theory where there is full of inflammatory markers which are again, and these are the genes that are responsible. There is reduced apoptotic genes, anti-apoptotic factors are promoted, increased MMP expression, and pro-angiogenic factors. So there is again a hypoxic stress which will lead to ROS, and there is formation of this incomplete debris clearance, and all these things will promote endometriosis. But now we see there are certain points that are not in favor of menstruation. That is, one is, while it is common in most menstruating women, only a subset of women with endometriosis, they develop this. For example, this is a patient with the Rokitansky syndrome, still they can have endometriosis. Endometriosis in distant sites like the diaphragm, lymph nodes, brain, etc., they don't have. The reason for endometriosis may not be retrograde spell, and then in male also they have demonstrated endometriosis. This is all because of the stem cells. And in deep infiltrative endometriosis, it is a different theory, that is the Mullerian rest cell theory. So now coming to the coelomic metaplasia theory by Ivanov Mayer, this endometriosis develops in all coelomic wall derivatives because of metaplastic changes. This suggests that peritoneal cells under the certain conditions can transform into endometrial-like cells. Endocrine disruptors, that is the phthalates, which are found very commonly in all the environments and in the agricultural products as well as in the cosmetics, they all have the capacity to transform and activate these coelomic cells. And this presence of this endometriosis in MRKH syndrome is being supported by the coelomic metaplasia. Then inflammation, that is the most important one. And I have given a review about this chronic inflammation and the macrophages, which are all producing this tumor necrosis alpha interleukins, and addition molecules are all produced that may lead to proliferation, vascularization, and maintenance of. Then when you think the hematogenous and lymphovascular spread, see, this is one disease which I compare with malignancy, but malignancy kills the patient. It causes mortality. But whereas endometriosis is one condition where it causes morbidity to the patient. So it can travel via the blood vessels and the lymphatics to the distant sites. This is how they explain the presence of endometriosis in extrapelvic tissues. Stem cell therapy, now we know very well that there are two stem cells origin, two types of stem cell origin. One is the tissue origin, that is from the uterine endometrium or the bone marrow. The progenitor cells, they may differentiate into endometriotic lesion. They suggest that systemic involvement beyond local implantation may be because of this. The epithelial stem cells or the progenitor cells, they enter the circulation from the endometrium during regeneration of the proliferant phase, and they go astray ectopically to form the DIE. Then bone marrow derived progenitor cells may differentiate into endometriotic cells, and that is the reason why they say there can be systemic involvement beyond the local implantation. Anomalous differentiation and relocation of Mullerian duct during embryogenesis could lead to the spread of primordial stem cells migrated to the posterior uterine wall and are associated with adenomyosis. They remain dormant till telarchy, and once when there is early onset endometriosis during adolescence, they tend to grow up, and they all lead to posterior wall adenomyosis plus deep infiltrative endometriosis. So this is one type where there is Mullerian rest cells are present in the rectovaginal septum, and they are capable of producing adeno and DIE in young girls. Then the next theory is neonatal uterine bleeding and endometriosis. We commonly say that the neonatal uterine bleeding is because of the estrogen withdrawal effect from the mother, and the girl babies, less than 5% may have this neonatal uterine bleeding, and we did not give importance, but we now know that this neonatal uterine bleeding is a marker for endometriosis at a later stage. And they have also done a fetal autopsy of this young intrauterine dead fetuses, female fetuses, and they found out that the peritoneal cavity of 5 to 10% of these neonates had endometrial progenitor cells. That means the same is extrapolated into adulthood, where we see 5 to 10% of the adults can have endometriosis. So this is again this neonatal uterine bleeding. These girls, when they are exposed to estrogen at a that is at the start of telarchy itself, they start developing endometriosis. So this is about the fetal origin. The fetal endometrial cells were ontogenic resistant to progesterone, and this was the autopsy analysis showed 10% of the female fetuses, they had these receptors were positive for estrogen through IHC study. So the scientific evidences clearly support the fetal origin. The risk factors for adolescent endometriosis, neonatal uterine bleeding has been a proven risk factor by Eva Brosens et al. Then comes the immunological theory, where there is immune suppression is found to be the main important cause. There is a production of Th2. Normally, we need to have a Th2 cells which are protective, and Th1 which is going to be this is a common thing what we say in this progesterone situation. This progesterone resistance is high whenever Th2 is overactive. But Th2 helps us to improve the outcome. So in endometriosis, they found out that there was suppression of Th2 cells and Th1 is more, and higher CD4 and CD8 ratio was found, and there was higher concentration of T cells, and T17 cells were more in patients with the peritoneal fluid as the disease increases, and the percentage of Treg cells were found to be higher percentage of Treg cells in the peritoneal fluid of patients, and no changes in the peripheral blood. So these are all some of the immunological changes which happens in endometriosis. So these are again, this will show how these T cells are altered, Treg cells are increased, and inflammatory tumor markers and then cytokines are all aberrantly elevated, including angiogenesis. So then comes the microenvironmental changes, that is the macrophages. Natural killer cells are decreased, so that is why they fail to clear up the cells. And then the mast cells, this is again a newer theory. The mast cells are capable of producing histamines. They all cause pro-inflammatory. That is why some of the newer drugs has been evaluated to suppress this mast cell activity. Then again, T cells and B cells we have already explained. So angiogenesis and neurogenesis, there is higher incidence of VEGF and neural growth factor, and there is higher fiber density. All these things will interplay between the angiogenesis, and inflammation exacerbates the disease progression. So this is the pictorial representation. Neuroangiogenesis is there, neural growth factor is high, and VEGF is high. So ultimately, there is increased capillary growth. They have found out that the density of capillary fibers as the neural fibers are higher in endometriotic tissue. That is why a substance that can be anti-angiogenic, like bromocriptine or gabapentin, can be helpful in suppressing this. Then embryonic rest cell theory, that is the embryonic remnants of Mullerian ducts. These are present in the pelvic structures, in the peritoneum, rectovaginal septum, ovary, and the bladder. Under estrogenic stimulation during puberty, they can differentiate into endometrial-like tissue. So probably these are the explanation that is given to extragenital endometriosis that are found in locations other than the pelvis, like lungs, brain, diaphragm. And to say no organ in the body is exempted from having endometriosis except spleen, because of higher reticuloendothelial flow, which washes away this endometriotic tissues. But now there is currently a recent evidence to show that they have demonstrated endometriosis in the spleen also. Then everything, now we say that gut is the main origin of all these diseases, and estrobolome and the gut dysbiosis. Here again, whenever there is increased estrobolome, that is, it helps in the maintaining this normal percentage of this estrogen should be there to promote the healthy microbiome. But due to this dietary factors and endogenous factors and the genetic factors, whenever there is increase in the phytoestrogens, there is change in the risk of endometriosis. When the gut microbiome is normal with a functional estrobolome, with the glucuronidase, which can maintain the bioavailability and bioactivity and endogenous estrogenic activity, it forms into a healthy person without endometriosis. But at the same time, whenever there is abnormal dysbiotic gut microbiota, this will cause dysfunctional estrobolome, which will lead to patients developing endometriosis. So zinc deficient endometriosis is another cause, they found out that reduced zinc level will reduce the immunity. All of us know that it can promote oxidative stress and inflammation, which is again the basic cause. Genetics is playing a major role, and these are some of the susceptibility genes that can be found out by genome-wide association studies. There is familial clustering as well as twin studies has shown that it is a heritable risk. I have already mentioned that there is 6.9-fold times higher risk. So this was a global study where it shows that was published in Nature, where it shows that endometriosis is rooted in genetics. They have studied genome association studies in nearly 60,000 women, and they found out that there are a lot of genes that are associated with endometriosis. This has contributed in understanding the disease mechanism, novel diagnostic approaches, and development of targeted therapies. So these are some of the challenges, genetic insights, and then there are some opportunities how the elusive disease can be understood, the pathogenesis can be understood, and there is challenges is lack of non-invasive diagnosis, and integration of genetic markers can help in the early diagnosis. Disease has got a heterogeneous presentation. Personalized treatment strategies based on the genetic insights is possible. Delayed diagnosis and misdiagnosis, can be counteracted by the early and accurate diagnosis through genetic markers, validation of genetic markers, and risk of predictive models. Now we have the opportunity of enhanced risk assessment and stratification, translating genetic findings into routine clinical practice, incorporating the genetic transformation into diagnostic, ethical consideration, ethical guidelines for responsible for genetic testing. All these opportunities ultimately help us to detect the disease earlier and treat the disease at a personalized point. So the conclusion from the study was this can help genetic markers, risk prediction models, and multidimensional approaches can revolutionize earlier detection, accurate risk assessment, and personalized management. Future research should focus on validation, replication, and integration of genetic finds in the routine clinical practice to maximize the use of clinical utility of genetic insights and endometriosis diagnosis and patient care. So epigenetic theory is one thing where there is DNA hypermethylation or hypomethylation or histone modification and microRNAs. These are the microRNAs which are dysregulated in endometriosis, and they can be found out from the tissues or from the blood or from the saliva. And there are a lot of circulating microRNAs, and I have worked on this microRNA 125, 150, 342, 3613, and LED7B. Among this, 125 and LED7B are found to be highly sensitive for non-invasive diagnosis. So this is the same thing, epigenetic, how it forms. So endocrine disruptors, the PCBs, dioxins, and phthalates can disrupt the hormone balance and potentially contribute to the development of the endometriosis. These endocrine disrupting factors, they play a major role. Then some of them are polychlorinated bisphenols, dioxins, and bisphenols, and phthalates. They can cause hormonal imbalance, produce more of estrogen. They can cause inflammation, cell growth and survival, and abnormal growth, which is the hallmark of endometriosis. Then again, estrogen and this hormonal changes, we all know that there is hyperestrogenism, there is E2 dominance, and there is progesterone resistance, which lead to cell proliferation, uncontrolled proliferation due to estrogen stimulation, and then inflammation and angiogenesis. So this picture will show how there is pro-inflammatory factors are all upregulated and how the anti-inflammatory factors are downregulated in endometriosis. So there is increased oxidative stress because of iron overload, repeated bleeding, ROS, DNA, they will lead to DNA damage, and there is fibrosis and inflammation. Fibrogenesis, it is a fibrotic disease, endometriosis. There is TGF-beta activation, smooth muscle metaplasia, extracellular matrix deposition. All these things will lead to fibrogenesis in endometriosis and formation of adhesions. And lifestyle modification, of course, it is the most important one, where you have to have a dietary modification by reducing the red meat, trans meat, and low omega-3 will be higher omega-3 supplementation will be good. Should try to reduce the environmental toxins, avoid sedentary lifestyle, promote the physical activity, chronic stress should be suppressed. So if there is failure of all these things, it will lead to systemic inflammation, immune dysregulation, estrogen dominance, and growth of endometriotic lesions, and growth. Ultimately, the disease will spread. So to prevent the disease, we need to have lifestyle modification through proper exercise, yoga, and proper dietary supplementation is needed. And then stress also promotes endometriosis. Stress promotes by altering the hormones, stimulating the cortisol, and then promoting inflammation, cellular infiltration through mast cells, T cells, and macrophages and cytokines. And there is also increased nerves. Abnormal, this nociceptive and nociplastic pathway will promote the pain sensation. So that is why initially it is a nociceptive pathway where because of the lesion it causes pain, but ultimately even if you cure the lesion, the said pathways to the spinal cord through the nociplastic pathway is maintained and it causes pain with even minimal trigger. So the future direction is we need to manage the stress by all means, and the takeaways are endometriosis is a multifactorial systemic inflammatory disease, not merely a consequence of retrograde menstruation. Multiple theories are there, and there is often a complex interaction between the genetic susceptibility, hormone imbalance, immune dysfunction, neuroangiogenesis, and environmental influence. So personalized medicine approaches may improve the addressing the genetic and epigenetic features. Understanding the mechanism enables the early diagnosis, personalized management, and individualization of the treatment, and future research is needed to develop more effective individualized treatment strategies. To put it in a nutshell, this is a single picture what I got from AI, what are the causes for endometriosis, that is retrograde menstruation, genetic susceptibility, immune dysfunction, hormone imbalance, inflammation, stem cell activity, and ultimately any of these mechanism or combination of this mechanism can lead to endometriosis. So a message in a single slide: endometriosis develops through a self-perpetuating cycle of implantation, immune dysfunction, inflammation, angiogenesis, and fibrosis, ultimately leading to pain and infertility. So thanks for the opportunity. This is my team at Satyabama University with whom I work in all my research studies in endometriosis. And once again, I thank Dr. Chitra, SIG group of IFS for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. This was like a roller coaster ride for endometriosis. By the time we could grasp one, the second concept was there, and the next. So there are like multiple. And so it is so very well said that now is not the time to get into which theory caused the endometriosis. But what is important to understand is that these different causations should help us in prevention, early diagnosis, and letting us know that which theory can fit into which phenotype. So if, like you were asking, that in South India, possibly, the genotype can be different. This could be there, that there is more predisposition to endometriosis. It has to do with childhood nutrition, to weight, to so many factors which you just said. So I remember that during my fellowship days, there was a UK group which had come in 2002, where with the collaboration with Dr. B.N. Chakravarti, they started doing an oxygene study where all the blood samples from Indian population would go. And possibly the concept was that all the retrograde menstruation, the cells are in the hypoxic condition, and this hypoxia causes mutation or some kind of an alteration which makes this cell survive and proliferate. So I don't think half of the things we will be able to even diagnose right now clinically, ma'am.
True.
So it would be really lovely if any of one of us can throw some more light. If some, active studies in India are there, or can we look into, because right now our diagnosis is only based on clinical suspicion, ultrasound findings, and MRI findings mostly. So this is how we keep going on with. So if anything more is happening in India, we would really love to hear from all the people who are attending this meeting today.
Thank you, Dr. Shweta.
I think Ramani madam should know. She's a walking
Yeah,
research.
I know.
She's only up to date to what's the research happening in endometriosis. Dr. Shalini, anything your view? Dr. Jayashree?
So I can share one more thing
that was such an,
yeah.
that was
No,
such.
no. You speak, then I will tell you one more thing what
Go,
Peter
Dr. Shweta.
Humaydan had said. Should I say or no?
Okay, no, I just said that was such an excellent and eye-opener. Yeah, you go ahead, Dr. Shweta.
No, so that is what Dr. Peter Humaydan this time said, that especially for adenomyosis, what he does is to improve all this inflammatory response before a frozen embryo transfer. He not only gives 2 doses of GnRH depot, but then it followed by letrozole for 21 days, 3 weeks, and then he starts HRT cycle and a high dose of progesterone. So this was one clinical, point which he had said could be tried. I don't know. I'm just trying it for one of my patients where I removed a 20 centimeter adenomyoma. So very, very little data, but maybe we can try that. Keeping the theories what Dr. Ramni ma'am just, told us and briefed us.
Madam, in our center, we have been using a combination of GnRH analog with letrozole with norethistron combination for adenomyosis patients before going in for an FET. And after using this, the results of ART in adenomyosis is almost at par with the male factor or the tuber factor. So what we generally do is we measure the volume of the uterus. See the volume of the uterus, to quote one patient, she was referred to me from a neighboring place with a huge posterior wall mass of 5 into 6 centimeters. They said it was a myoma and they had referred the patient for myomectomy. Then when I did the scan, I found it was only adenomyosis. So I thought initially, and the volume of the uterus was around 200 ml. So I thought, why don't we try at least this medical management? And I used this for 4 months and the volume came down to 108.
Ma'am, sorry, what did you use, ma'am? What did you
I
use?
used Zoladex. I am a very fond person using this
I
Goserelin.
remember you were using from so many years. I thought
Yeah,
something
so many years. Goserelin with letrozole 2.5 milligram with regesterone. Normally that is primarily norethistron tablet. Of course, I supplement with vitamin D, calcium, and even in some cases I have used this alendronates to prevent BMD reduction. Okay, so I give them 2 doses, ask them to come back, then measure. So once after 4 or 5 doses, the volume came down to 110. Then I thought that was the right time where we should start the FET, and we transferred and she had twin babies. So the main advantage is we are not going in for surgical adenomyomectomy, which will increase the risk of rupture during the pregnancy. And surgery is definitely, I feel, medical management. If she's at the same time, I have had patient failed IVF outside for adenomyosis. Second time we had repeated it after following the same protocol of GnRH analogs and letrozole. She had a missed abortion with that. Then I thought there should be something else. So then my embryologist was telling me, madam, you go ahead with adenomyomectomy. I did it, and then I transferred, and this time we had a pregnancy, but at 34 weeks of gestation, the placenta was over the previous scar site, and she started having a bleeding, and I had to go for an emergency section, and we had the baby, and the baby was fine. 34 weeks plus, baby was fine, and the mother was also all right. So these are, I think there is definitely a role for suppressing adenomyosis prior to FET cycle. But now I think, Dr. Sweta, I had come across few of the articles where they say the results are the same, whether you downregulate or not. But practically, I think it is our own experience what we have to share. And
I think smaller uterine length and small size of adenomyosis and localized, we need not do it.
Sure.
But larger the uterine size, then prolonged downregulation.
Probably beyond 100 ml volume, we need to downregulate.
Keeping all the origins of theories of endometriosis in mind, this is how the treatment will be directed in future.
Yes, yes.
It's going to
and
be.
Of course, I have used gabercolin also.
Yes.
Oh.
That is also good, especially in patient with severe dyspareunia.
Ma'am, you use combination of letrozole, cabergoline, or
No. I am telling gabercolin also. Gabercolin can also be combined with Dynagest or
like an anti-VEGF.
Theory
has come in.
So the mode of action is different. You can block it at VEGF level, and when you combine it with the Dynagas, it has got a different action, anti-inflammatory, anti-apoptotic activity, all those things are suppressed. So that can also help. So combination can definitely help.
Ma'am, there's one question. Can you share your experience of using elagolix in adenomyosis before
Yes.
HRT?
Yes, we have used because use the same thing. Instead of using a GnRH agonist injectable one, we are using oral GnRH analogs. I mean, oral GnRH antagonist. That is also quite efficient in reducing the pain factor as well as the volume. But
At least for 3 months, ma'am.
yeah,
What is the
minimum
rate?
3 months you need to use.
Oh, what is the success rate, ma'am? FET
It
success
is
rate after
okay. It is
elagolix?
almost it's as good as an injectable one.
And you have seen a reduction in the volume of
Definitely.
adenomyoma. Okay.
I'll be coming out with my study, publishing my study on elagolix, real world study. It's a
Okay, that's what.
multicentric study where we have covered around 75 patients and almost 40 patients from my center. We have done it, and they are, at least the pain factor is, they are very comfortable with the pain factor. And the most important thing why I prefer elagolix is it is dose adjustable. And when compared to Relagolix has got a built-in add back. Probably that is the reason why we have slightly this effect of Relagolix is not as good as Elagolix higher dose for a shorter term.
Yeah. Man, what is a volume reduction you expect before you transfer? Like 2 or sometimes.
That's what I said. My volume, yeah, I aim at a volume of 100 to 110 maximum.
Okay, that's the best. Till that time, you can be giving elagolix or letrozole.
Yes, yes.
Okay, fine. And even it is a localized adenomyoma, you are telling no need to go for resection. You just give only this thing.
Yes.
Because I had few patients whom I did adenomyomectomy and I put them on GnRH, so I thought I had to change bit. And even Dr. Ambika was also had the questions that way. Yeah.
See, actually, long time back, I had one patient who was referred with 16 weeks of adenomyosis for hysterectomy in Alipara. I told no hysterectomy for you. I put her on Zoladex 4 doses. Then I told her to come 3 doses. I told her to come after that. She came back after 6 months with vomiting. I was very happy to see a single fetus inside. So definitely, all those magics can happen sometimes, but it definitely reduces the volume of the uterus and the pain.
But Zoladex is costly, no, madam. It's 9,000.
Zoladex is the best drug.
Best drug.
Best drug. You cannot compare. You cannot compare Leuprolide with Goserelin.
Yes.
It is a wonderful drug. I only use.
Ma'am, but it's very costly, ma'am. 9,000 rupees.
No, they are anyway spending a lot of money. You just see the long-term expenditure. It is a 1 month expenditure. See, I think we should not use GnRH agonists so loosely just before cryo-ET. No role at all anymore. This we are using specifically as a prolonged downregulation before FET. That is it. To improve implantation and not in all cases.
Yeah, in unexplained recurrent implantation failure also, we need to identify subtle adenomyosis. So that has to be drilled into our mind, and putting 2 or 3 doses of maybe for subtle cases, maybe I prefer using a Leupride. That has also found to improve the implantation.
Nice.
What's your experience? Yeah, just one question. So what's your experience with Mirena, ma'am, vis-a-vis all these GnRH agonists or elagolix? And then
Mirena, I am a very fond user of Mirena, where I put Mirena only when the intrauterine length of the uterus comes down to less than 10 centimeters. So initially, till then, I put the patient on GnRH agonist or some or antagonist, reduce the volume, then insert. See, the advantage is by using preliminary antagonist or preliminary analog, the endometrium gets thinned out. And after, when you put in the Mirena, there is no breakthrough bleeding. That is also avoided, and at the same time, expulsion is also not there.
Ma'am, I was also okay. Dr. Shalini told what might be multiparous, but if at all nulliparous, planning conception, can we put Mirena?
Yes, I've used Mirena.
Can you remove it, madam?
For nullipara, not adenomyosis, I prefer using only GnRH analog. The exception is when there is endometrial hyperplasia.
Okay, in those conditions, fine.
And
Yeah.
specific to, like you mentioned in your talk, ma'am, about your diet and the exercises. So, any specific type of exercises or just the
See,
routine?
the exercise in endometriosis itself is a big chapter, big
Yeah.
topic. Because not our routine exercise for weight bearing exercise, that is not enough. You need to go for relaxation exercise, and then you have to have a pelvic floor massage and trigger points and all those things. So many things
Yeah.
are coming up in a big way. Muscle relaxation, it is all fibrosed. That is the reason for pain. So stretch exercise in the pelvis, that is very important.
Okay, very good. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for that very
Thank you.
nice academic
Yeah.
session and good interaction, ma'am. Shweta, ma'am, thank you so much.
Chitra, thank you for your starting this SIG program on endometriosis series webinar.
Ma'am, who else better than you who can start with this webinar? And I have a very passion for endometriosis. So I thought, like you are one guru, I'm one shishya for you. So let us start with us. So now we'll be having a lot, madam. So we need your support for all those things.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now,
Thank you,
yeah. Thank you,
Chairperson.
Shweta,
Thank you,
ma'am. In
Shweta.
spite of
Thank
your
you,
busy
Shalini,
things, you
and everybody.
were here and shared your thoughts, and really it was very nice, ma'am. Thank you so much,
Thank you
Shweta,
so
ma'am.
much. All my
I'll really never forget it because we worked as a second under, you and Pankaj sir has really fried us last 2 years.
so much.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I request Dr. Jayashree, the IFS Pondicherry Chapter Secretary, to give vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank our IFS President and IFS Secretary for giving us this opportunity to host the webinar. This is actually our second episode from IFS Pondicherry chapter. And many thanks to our dear Chitra for being dynamite behind this whole program and our whole OGSP and IFS Pondicherry chapter. And thank you each and every chairperson and speaker, Dr. Ramli Devi ma'am, for giving us a wonderful session. Thank you all.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Jayashree, for collaborating with us, and let us do much more in the future. And I thank all my co-conveners, the delegates, everything. Thank you so much. Let us meet every month, and in between we'll have some more sessions also. Thank you all. Thank you, Shalini. Thank you, Chitra ma'am.
Yeah. Bye, Dr. Chitra.
Are you
Great
looking very
start.
pretty, Shalini?
Yeah.
I think you came from nice meeting.
No. That's okay.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great,
Bye-bye.
great start,
Yeah, I
Dr.
forgot to
Chitra.
tell you, Neena ma'am was supposed to catch a flight to Ishre. She was just running. She just called me up and told, convey my thanks and all the best wishes. So just doing things. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Okay. So bye-bye till we meet again. Bye.